Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion on employment for Black Americans and how the private sector is stepping up. And if you just heard me repeat myself, my apologies. I think I'm on time here now. My name is Alice McCarthy, and I direct the Center on Education and Labor at New America. It's a real privilege to be here with you today and with this esteemed group of panelists. So thank you to the Chamber of Commerce and to the Center on Education and Workforce, and thank you to our panelists and to all of you who are joining us for this discussion. Today, we're going to focus on the urgent need to address the outsized negative impact of the pandemic on employment opportunities for Black Americans, particularly Black Americans without a four-year degree. Just to give some context, in 2019, Black unemployment hit a historic low of 5%. Then in 2020, the pandemic hit, sending that rate over 16%. And since then, Black unemployment has been consistently higher than it has been for other groups, sometimes even double that of white workers. As we know from the Great Recession and decades of labor market research, long-term unemployment and underemployment have lasting negative impacts on workers, their families, and on whole communities. So ensuring that Black Americans who have been so negatively impacted by the pandemic and frankly have long faced barriers to high quality employment, ensuring Black Americans are able to find their way back into good family sustaining jobs is of paramount importance to our future economic and social well-being. Today, we're going to hear from a group of innovative leaders on how the private sector is leaning into that challenge and what more it can do. Specifically, we're going to hear from Kwasi Mitchell, who is the Chief Purpose Officer at Deloitte, where he is responsible for driving a firm-wide strategy to make Deloitte's commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion a reality. Next, we're going to hear from Maurice Jones, CEO of OneTen. If you haven't heard of OneTen yet, you'll be excited. It is a groundbreaking coalition of chief executives and their companies who are coming together to upskill, hire, and promote 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years. And third, we're going to hear from Jamie Merisotis, President and CEO of Lumina Foundation, and a prolific author and commentator on how the United States can better leverage the tremendous talent all around us. So with that, I'm going to turn to you, Kwasi, and let's start with can you share with us what you and Deloitte's, your and Deloitte's perspective on how to improve job options and opportunities available to Black Americans, and some specifics about what you're doing?
Exactly, and I'll start that by just saying one of the primary things that we are actively doing is working with Maurice and OneTen. We are heavily focused on disrupting the talent pipeline more broadly and providing opportunities for Black professionals, who lack a four-year degree to find pathways to family-sustaining jobs. And historically, we've seen so many different things that have prevented opportunities for this particular cohort, from lack of opportunities with respect to high quality education, skill development, work experience, and labor market discrimination. So all of that being said and done, primary item that we're heavily focused on right now is our commitment to OneTen, including being a co-lead for the Dallas area, where we'll be driving on the ground strategy.
So that feels like a perfect segue to you, Maurice. And can you tell us about OneTen and what you think needs to happen to ensure more Black Americans have access to good jobs?
Absolutely. It was nice to be with you and Jamie and Kwasi as well. So OneTen is a coalition now of about 60 companies. They've committed to the North Star of hiring and advancing 1 million Black talent who don't yet have four-year degrees into family-sustaining careers and jobs over the next 10 years. And the focus really is working with companies like Deloitte, who are committing jobs, who are going beyond that and are committing to actually change and transform their hiring and promotion and human capital practices so that they're focused on skills as the primary way to hire folks and to upskill folks and to promote folks, as opposed to a credential. The companies are forming a community of practice, which is about learning from one another in the areas where they have to be great in order for us to reach this aspiration. And they're sticking at it for 10 years, a decade, because the goal here is transform the companies, transform in partnership the lives of Black talent and their families, and and I'm a naive optimist, transform the country and make it a better, a more perfect union. And so that's what we're about. This notion of focusing on skills is a big piece of what we have to do to make sure that Black talent really has sustainable access to these jobs and careers, no matter what else is going on in the economy.
Wonderful. And that feels like a perfect segue then to how people acquire those skills. And so let's move to Jamie Merisotis of Lumina Foundation. Over the last decade, Lumina has really been leaning into the need for stronger connections between our post-secondary education system and good jobs. And it also has set ambitious goals for increasing the share of Americans with post-secondary credentials. And it followed up on that with a very strong equity imperative across all of its strategic grant making. Jamie, welcome. And can you please share with us how you and Lumina Foundation are working to dismantle barriers to good jobs for Black Americans, how that fits into your grant making strategies and your investments?
Thanks very much, Mary Alice. Yeah, well, first of all, let me underscore what you said, which is that we are describing ourselves as an equity-first organization. This is not a new thing that Lumina Foundation has come to. We've been focused on this for more than a decade. And it's a very important part of our agenda to increase high quality post-high school learning as part of a longer term trajectory of better strengthening the linkage between learning and work. We have a rising demand for talent in the United States. And we know that in order to meet that rising demand for talent, we're going to have to educate a lot more Americans in order to be able to do that. I want to underscore the point, though, that Black Americans have faced enormous barriers to equal educational opportunity that's impeded their chances of being gainfully employed and ultimately more successful. And by successful, I mean not just in terms of making more money, but also building wealth and creating greater social and political power over time. So, our efforts at Lumina Foundation have focused in the last few years on short-term credentials and associate degrees. We think that's important as a pathway to the long-term success that's going to be required, again, particularly for Black Americans and other people of color. And we're trying to do so through a variety of strategies. And I'd like to just underscore one, if I might, because we're proud to have invested in the Chamber Foundation and the work that the Chamber is doing in these regards, particularly the Talent Pipeline Management Academies that are designed for community colleges and sub-baccalaureate program leaders and their employee partners. Part of what we're trying to do is build these career pathways so that they can align these pathways with the credentials that people are earning in community colleges in real time with the in-demand jobs and skills that the actual employment prospects that people will face following completion are facing. So, I'm a big fan of what Maurice and his colleagues are trying to do with OneTen. Skills are the key to this. I think credentialing people so that they can continue to build those skills over time and continue to get new opportunities so that they build on where they started is increasingly important. And that's going to be particularly important for Black Americans who have faced the barriers that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. And I'm going to just follow up with that with a question for Kwasi and Maurice to get back to this question of, again, we all agree that what really needs to be recognized are skills, right? And for people to be hired for them. What are you finding are the biggest barriers to making that a reality? What are the barriers both to Black employment, and what are the barriers to this kind of skills-based hiring methodology that you all are promoting?
What's interesting is, if you think about it, a lot of it's habit, right? I mean, fundamentally, just taking a step back and looking at the way that we've hired traditionally. And if our preponderance and use of a 4 years degree really to weed out talent through the selection process is really fundamentally necessary for the careers of the future. And so, Mary Alice, when we think about it within our firm, it's evaluating different aspects of, is a 4 year degree required? Which we're finding more and more it is not. And then in addition to that, thinking about what are the high growth areas within our specific needs that are skills based, they're tech focused, that we can expand our existing hire to train programs and things of that nature to really bring people into the organization.
And I think I would add to that just a couple things. So I amen to all of what Kwasi said. You have a mindset issue as well, right? You've got this notion of a bias in favor of a credential. And by the way, that bias is a self-inflicted wound. We as a country have been telling our youth, our adults, our parents, hey, gotta go get that 4-year degree if you want to make something of yourself. Gotta go make sure your child goes to get that 4-year degree if they want to make. Well, guess what? We internalize that message. And so now we got a mindset shift that needs to occur. In addition to that, honestly, is a risk issue, right? If you're a hiring manager, you take a risk on someone with a credential, people will say, and that doesn't work out, people will say, well, that was a prudent risk. You take a risk on someone without a 4-year degree, the traditional credential, and the risk is that people will say, of course, that was not going to work. And so there's a risk issue here as well. All of this, though, can be overcome by seeing the work of companies like Deloitte who are doing this, doing it well, having success, and sustaining a diverse and a profitable enterprise. And we gotta tell more of those stories.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to pose a question to the group then, sort of following up on that. We know that the pandemic had an outsized impact on Black Americans who lost jobs at higher rates. And then we also know that Black women in particular are still not really a part of the recovery, and they have been the group that has lost the most amount of jobs and have recovered the fewest amounts of jobs. According to the latest estimate, employment among Black women there are still 550,000 fewer jobs for Black women today, and 550,000 fewer women are working today than in February of 2020. And even more alarming, among unemployed women ages 16 and over, 41% of unemployed Black women have been out of work for more than 6 months. And of course, that is our marker of long-term unemployment, which I said is a real mark, is a real as we know, sort of a warning sign, because we know from lots of research that long-term unemployment can really have lasting impacts. So I want to ask you all, what are some ways that the private sector should be thinking about the employment for Black women? What is the way the policy community should be thinking about helping the private sector in this space? And what are some things that we just need to be honest and think about in terms of the jobs and what we need to make sure that they come back for Black women? What should we be doing? Any thoughts?
Well, maybe I can start. So, look, first, these gaps are unacceptable, right? So you look at things like the median annual wages for Black women are about $38,000 a year compared to white non-Hispanic men of $61,000 a year. Those gaps, the employment gaps and the wage gaps are simply unsupportable in terms of our long-term prosperity as a nation. So, how do we address the issues that have confronted Black women? Well, we've got to do a better job of addressing things like healthcare, addressing things like family and social supports that are really critical. If I'm right about what I said earlier about the relationship between learning and work, it means that we've got to bring down the barriers of what I call the three-legged stool of barriers that confront Black women and other minoritized populations, right? The academic barriers, the social barriers, and the financial barriers. We tend to think about these strategies, both from a government policy perspective and from a private sector perspective, as one-offs. If we can just do a better job of increasing their financial supports, they'll be able to make it through the system. Or if we can do a better job of providing them with the child care, the housing support, et cetera, they'll do a better job. But the reality is you've got to deal with the fact that prior educational experience has been poor, the financial supports are not there, and the social supports are not there. And for Black women, facing these barriers, I think, is an added burden. And the gap between, as I said, Black women and other populations, particularly white men, is very high. So putting our thumb on the scale of increasing opportunities for Black women with increasing academic, financial, and social supports, I think will be very important.
Kwasi or Maurice, anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is I think that we just can't forget what we observed during the pandemic. I mean, look, we should be clear, like there's lessons that we're learning here. Jamie just gave an outstanding series of opportunities that we should be moving forward with. We just can't brush off like we're on the other side of the pandemic. Let's move forward and return to business as usual.
Yeah, and look, I'll just add this. I'll second the emotions of my colleagues, but also add this. Look, there's an inside game here and an outside game. Inside the companies and the employers, for-profit and not-for-profit, have to understand that they have yet to reach the place where you've got an environment within which Black women can thrive, right? And so I don't want to just point to some of the outside things, and I'm going to talk about those, but there's still, the pandemic has shown, has highlighted that there's more work to be done inside to retain and to make sure that the company is doing what it needs to do to wrap its arm around Black women who are wrestling with both what's happening inside the company and the responsibilities outside. And then to Jamie's point, outside, you've got to make sure that quality childcare is available, right? You've got to make sure that where you're taking advantage of making jobs virtual, that you do so that folks can do the caregiving for families. And that's both children and partner and, frankly, mother and father and grandfather often that Black women are engaged in. We just got to be a more holistic private sector in policy space if we truly going to create the kind of environment in which Black women can thrive through the ups and downs that come from the economy, from health, et cetera. And so that's what I think the pandemic in 2020 has hopefully helped us to relearn, revisit. We still have work to do in all of these spaces.
Fantastic. And I know we are getting down to time here, so I just want to sort of put it out there if there's any final thoughts, again, in particular on this question of retention and career advancement for Black Americans as they get into that first job, moving up. What can companies be doing to hold on and advance their Black workers? That's a question actually from the audience. Any thoughts on that to close us out here?
It's very similar to what Maurice said before. It's got to be a holistic approach. There's no silver bullets, and it needs to be thoughtful with respect to all aspects of advancement.
And the pathway for advancement needs to be transparent, and it needs to be contemplated before that person hits the doorway, right? And so a lot of the focus is on hiring and hiring people back. The focus really needs to be on the trajectory of the talent, hiring, upskilling, and advancing. And there needs to be a plan from day one for that journey. It needs to be a journey, not a hire.
All right. Well, that is a wonderful point to end on. Thank you so much to Kwasi, Maurice, and Jamie for this excellent conversation. And I will hand it back over to our friends at the Chamber. Thank you so much, everyone. Great conversation.
Thank you all. Nice to be with you.